Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who's not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. Or whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. We're continuing in the book, the Hadrami Introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, which is an introductory text of Shafi'i fiqh, authored by the Allama Ba Fadl. We've made it to page 8 in the text, page 8, where it says disliked acts regarding wudu. So in this section, after mentioning the 6 things that are absolutely required when you make your wudu, because failing to do any of those 6 means that you failed to make a wudu. All right, those 6 things are by far the most important parts of the wudu. That's why they're the obligatory parts. After discussing the obligatory parts of wudu, we then discussed the recommended parts of wudu. And that's the section we just finished. Now we're going to talk about the things that are makruh in wudu. Okay, things that are disliked for a person to do in their wudu. He says, may Allah have mercy on him. He says, it is disliked to be extravagant in pouring water. What does he mean by this? Extravagant. He means wasting water. Wasting water. And when they say wasting water, they don't simply mean using a lot of water. That's not what they mean. Okay, it's not necessarily disliked if you use a lot of water in your wudu. Rather, what's disliked is to waste the water. For example, if you turn on the spigot, okay, and you put your hand under that water to grab some water, and then you take your hand out from under the water to wash your face, but the water is still running. This is wasting water. Why? Because now you have water that's coming out the faucet and going straight to the drain. It's not even touching your body. It's not cleaning anything. Okay? If the water is just going straight to the drain and doesn't touch you, that water is being wasted. This is israf. This is being extravagant with the water. You're wasting it. Okay? I'm not talking about someone who is putting his arm under the spigot and he's running his arm under there like this. You know, he's got the water going over it and he's using a lot of water in the process, but the water is actually going onto his body and washing him. That's not israf. Okay? Although it is using a lot of water, and it is recommended that you use a small amount of water in your wudu, but it wouldn't be disliked unless you're wasting the water, meaning the water's running and it's not touching your body at all. It's just going straight down to the drain. This is israf. Okay, when you make wudu, you want to put your hand under the spigot, turn the spigot on, take some water, turn it off. Then you take the water, wash your face. When you're ready to do your hand, you run the water, get some water in your hand, And then you lift your hand up and rub it around your arm. You don't let the water keep running while you are making your wudu. Okay, that's wasting the water, and this is disliked. It takes away from the reward of your wudu. The one who wastes water gets very little, if any, reward for his wudu. And everything I just said about how wasting the water takes away the reward of your wudu, that wasting water is makruh. Everything I just said assumes that you are the owner of the water. So if you're making wudu in your own house and you let the water run while you're, and it's not touching your body in any way, it's just going straight to the drain. If that's happening while you're making wudu at your own house with your own water, then it is makruh. It's disliked, and you lose reward from your wudu for doing that. However, if you do that with water that does not belong to you, in that case, it's haram to waste that water unless you have permission from the owner to waste it. So, for example, if you go to the masjid and you make wudu in the wudu area of the masjid, it is haram for you to leave the water running as you make your wudu, unless, of course, your body is under that water the whole time. All right, learn how to turn the water on and then turn it off. Make your wudu. Turn the water on, then turn it off. Okay, don't let it just keep running. Okay, this is important because you'll acquire sins if you're doing that with water that belongs to someone else. MashaAllah. What's next? He says, and to interlace the fingers through a thick beard for one who is in state of ihram. I think it should say in the state of ihram, or perhaps in a state of ihram. Remember, ihram is a state that you enter into when you're performing a pilgrimage. Whether it's umrah or hajj, you go into a state called ihram. When you're in ihram, it is forbidden to remove hairs or fingernails or toenails from your body. So ordinarily, when you make wudu, it's sunnah for the man with a thick beard to put his hand from underneath the beard to stick his fingers into the beard and, rub his fingers through the beard. That's sunnah in wudu ordinarily. But if you're in a state of ihram for hajj or umrah, in that case, it's disliked for the man to do that because there's a very big risk that he will pull a hair out in the process, and it's haram for him to pull out any hairs from his body while he's in the state of ihram. So when you're in ihram, you don't do that. Okay, don't put your fingers into the beard. To do so is disliked. And if you pull out a hair in the process, well, then you did something haram, and there are penalties for that while you're in the state of ihram. Someone said that they bought a bottle that sprays water in mist form. I don't see how that would help you when you make wudu. Wudu requires that the water be flowing. If all it is mist, then the water isn't flowing. Unless you're spraying just a massive amount of sprays until there's so much water on your face that it starts flowing. In that case, it might be able to work. But people, I strongly suggest that you just do things the old-fashioned way. We don't need these newfangled products. Okay, just put your hand under this thing, fill your hand up with water, fill up one hand, your right hand with water, then cup your hands together and just go. Okay, it's really not that hard. Fill up a hand with water, lift your hand up, and the water will start flowing down your arm, and then you just spread it around. Fill up a hand with water, pour it onto this hand, let it run down, spread it. Okay, none of this is waste. You're not wasting water if you're going handful at a time, handful at a time, handful at a time. The water wasting comes when you got the faucet running the whole time. When you put your hand under the faucet for like 1 second, pull your hand out, and then for the next 6 seconds, the water is just running down the drain. Okay, that's the waste which is disliked. That's what you don't want. Yeah, that's what you don't want. Remember, it's not disliked to use a lot of water in your wudu as long as you're actually using it. It's better to use a small amount of water because that's what's recommended. That's what's sunnah. But it's not disliked if you use a lot of water as long as you're actually using it. Okay, what's disliked is to waste the water, to have the water just going straight down a drain, completely unused. That's what we don't want. In fact, what would be better for all of us is if we had like a bucket or something. You just fill it up with water, put it down, then you dip your hand in the bucket to take what you need, and you make your wudu. You keep dipping your hand in your bucket every time you need more water. And then when you're done, you're done. Next person in your family needs to make wudu, they can just dip their hand in the same bucket. Okay, it's easy. You know, that way no water gets wasted. MashaAllah. So we said that wasting the water is disliked if you own it. Haram if you don't own the water or don't have the permission of the owner. The second thing that's disliked is to rub your fingers through the beard while you're in a state of ihram because of the risk that you might pull out a hair. The third thing that's disliked is to increase over 3. It says and to increase over 3. What does that mean? It means that one of the sunnahs of wudu is to do everything 3 times, right? You wash your hands 3 times. You say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim 3 times. You rinse out your mouth and nose 3 times each. You wash your face 3 times. You wash your right hand 3 times, left hand 3 times, wipe your head 3 times, wipe your ears 3 times, or maybe each aspect of the wiping of the ear 3 times. You wash your right foot 3 times, wash your left foot 3 times. You do everything 3 times. That's sunnah. That's what's recommended. Well, it's disliked to do more than 3. It's disliked to wash your face 4 times or 5 times, or to wash your right hand 4 times or 5 times. It's disliked to go more than 3. Okay, and when we say it's disliked to go more than 3, what we mean is purposefully. Okay, I'm not talking about someone who lost count. Okay, sometimes when you're making wudu, you lose count. You're like, wait, was that the 3rd time that I just washed my hand, or was that the 2nd time? And you're not sure. In that case, if you're not sure, what do? You wash your hand again. That way you can be sure that you did it 3 times. Even though there's now a possibility that you did it a 4th time, you don't know for sure it was 4 times. You know, that last time that you did it was because you weren't sure if you did it 2 or 3 times. And in these cases, what do? You always assume the lower number. So you go an extra time. Okay, but what's disliked? When you know you've done it 3 times already, and you decide to do it a 4th time, that's disliked. Makruh. Next, it says, and to seek help of someone to wash one's limbs, unless there is a reason. So yes, among the things that's disliked in wudu is for you to ask someone else to do your wudu for you. Like you ask someone else to pour the water on your face and then to wipe your face and wipe all the places. You ask someone else to pour the water on your arm, and then that person is the one that rubs the water around your arm for you. You're just staying there doing nothing, having the other person do all the actual work. It's disliked to do that unless you have a reason. Okay, if you're not able to do it yourself, well, then you have a reason. Like if you're injured or too sick or too weak, or if you have some kind of medical condition where you can't even control your arms, you're paralyzed, something like that. These are all examples of excuses. But if you don't have an excuse, then it is disliked to have someone else, do your wudu for you. Are there any questions about this small chapter, about the disliked acts regarding wudu? All right. Well, in that case, the next section is about the conditions of wudu as well as ghusl. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said the conditions of wudu and ghusl are: number 1, Islam. So it means that it's not possible for a kafir to make wudu or to make ghusl. When we say it's not possible for them to do these things, there's a couple of things we mean by that. Number one, we mean that it's not possible for a kafir to enter a state of purity. It's not possible for a kafir to actually lift the ruling of hadath from their bodies. All right, that ritual impurity, whether it's minor or major, that ritual impurity will stay on their body. Even if they did what looks like a wudu, even if they did what looks like a ghusl, the minor impurity remains on them, because an actual wudu to enter a state of purity is not possible from a kafir. Why is it that it's not possible from a kafir? It's because wudu and ghusl are acts of worship. They're acts of worship. And acts of worship require intentions. Okay, if you recall, one of the 6 absolutely vital elements of the wudu is the intention. And when we get to the ghusl chapter, you'll see that one of the absolutely vital elements of the ghusl also is the intention. Well, a kafir cannot have a valid intention to worship Allah because they don't have iman. They don't believe in Allah. They haven't said the words that made them a believer. And so their intentions are invalid for the purposes of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why a kafir cannot make a wudu that's valid, nor can they make a ghusl that's valid. However, it is possible for a kafir woman who is married to a Muslim man. Okay, so we're thinking about a woman from the people of the book who's married to a Muslim man. It is possible for her to make a ghusl. Okay, but not for the purpose of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That woman is a kafir. So her intention to worship is not valid. But it is possible for her to make a ghusl when her period is over, simply with the intention that because of the ghusl, her husband is now permitted to lay with her again. Okay, while she's on her period, the husband cannot lay with the wife. Okay, after the ghusl, he's permitted to do so again. The kafir woman can make a ghusl for that purpose. So her intention for the sake of a ghusl, if the intention is to become permissible for the husband to lay with, that intention can be valid from her, but the intention of worship will not be valid from her. Which is why even after she makes that ghusl, and that now the husband is allowed to lay with her, even after that, she still has major hadath on her body. She still has the major ritual impurity on her body. Okay, she's not in a state of purity. She's simply now permissible for her husband. Okay, so the goal of wudu and ghusl, which is to enter a state of purity, which is to lift hadath or remove najas, the goal of lifting hadath cannot happen for a kafir. Inshallah, that's clear. So that's the first condition of wudu and ghusl, that the person making wudu or ghusl must be a Muslim, okay, or else they will not enter a state of purity. Number 2, differentiation. Differentiation, it means they have mental discrimination. It means their minds are developed to the point where if you were to ask them a question, they can understand that question and respond with a reasonable answer. Okay, so we're not talking about someone who's like 2 or 3 years old, where, you know, if you ask them a reasonable question, you say, for example, I don't know, you ask him, do you go to school? You know, what's the name of your school? You know, and he turns around and says hamburger. You know, that child is too young. That child is not yet at a stage where he has mental discrimination. Some scholars define mental discrimination in a different way. They said a person is mentally discriminating once they are able to use the restroom independently. So they would say once a child can be trusted to go to the bathroom and clean themselves properly afterwards, that once a child can be entrusted with that child is then mentally discriminating. And so some people say it happens at around 7 lunar years of age. Some say that's when it happens. But if you go by the definition of understanding speech and responding in a reasonable way, well, then it may happen younger than that. Even if you go by being independent in the bathroom, it could happen younger than 7 lunar years of age. But in any case, a person needs to have that kind of mental discrimination in order for their wudu and ghusl to be valid. And ultimately, it's for the same reason as number one, because the person who doesn't understand what's going on, that person cannot have a valid intention. Okay, they can't even distinguish between what's worship and what's not worship. So they can't intend worship. This is also why a person who is insane cannot perform acts of worship, because they don't know what they're saying and doing. Number 3, he says purity from menses and postnatal bleeding. I don't really like his choice of the word purity here, because I think a lot of people, when they see the word purity, they will think it means that you have entered into a state of purity. Okay. And that's not what's meant here. Because if that's what the author actually meant, that you have to be in a state of purity from menses and postnatal bleeding in order to make a ghusl, then what that would mean then is that you need to already have ghusl in order to make a ghusl, and then that would be a logical impossibility. So that wouldn't make sense. When he says purity here, what it really means is free. All right, you're free from menses and postnatal bleeding. Okay, what he's saying here is that you're no longer menstruating, or you're no longer postnatal bleeding. That's what it means. That if you had that condition, it's over now. This is a condition for you to make wudu or ghusl. All right, the wudu or the ghusl are not valid while the person is menstruating, nor while the person is postnatal bleeding. And I'm not going to go into it, but note that even here, there's some exceptions. Just like we said for number 1, there's an exception for the case where it's possible for a kafir person to make a valid ghusl. Although it wouldn't be valid in terms of lifting impurity, it would just be valid in terms of becoming permissible to the husband. There are some cases where a person who's on her period or postnatal bleeding would be able to perform a valid ghusl. There are some exceptions, special cases, which we're not going to go into now. Number 4, it says purity from, and again, what he means is to be free from something. It says to be free from that which prevents water reaching the skin. So one of the conditions of your wudu or your ghusl, and I talk about this frequently, is that you have to make sure that you don't have anything that would prevent the water from flowing over the place that it needs to flow over, which is normally the skin, but it might be the fingernails or the toenails, okay? Or it might be hairs. It's not necessarily skin, but the places that the water has to flow over, which is typically the skin, you have to make sure that there's nothing there that would prevent the water from flowing over that skin or that fingernail. So a Band-Aid, for example, would need to be removed. Otherwise, the water will flow over top of the Band-Aid and won't get under it. If you have fingernail polish on, that fingernail polish has to be removed. Otherwise, the water will flow on top of the fingernail polish and will not actually touch the fingernail itself. Okay, it's a condition for your wudu or ghusl to be valid, that there not be any barrier that would prevent the water from reaching the place that it needs to reach. As always, if you have questions, ask. I'm going to assume this stuff is all understood. Number 5, knowledge of its obligation. What does that mean? It means that in order for your wudu or ghusl to lift impurity from your body and thereby put you in a state of purity, in order for that to take place, you need to know that you are not in a state of purity. You need to know that you're in a situation, you're in a state right now where you have an obligation to make wudu or ghusl. Okay, you need to understand that. You need to know the ruling that you're currently in. Okay, some people, they don't understand this issue. Now, there are some people where, like, if they can't remember, they can't remember if they have wudu or not. What do? They just go make wudu. They say, oh, I'm not sure if I have wudu. Let me just go make wudu. And I try to say to them, if you make wudu right now, your wudu is not going to count. Like, if you don't know that you need to make wudu, then any wudu you make is not going to lift hadath. Even if it turns out that you are in a state of impurity, if you don't know you're in a state of impurity, then when you make wudu, you don't get lifted out of the state of impurity. And again, this all goes back to the intention. Like, if you're in a state of impurity, your intention needs to be that you're doing this action, whether it's wudu or ghusl, you're doing this action in order to lift that impurity from your body. So you need to know that the impurity is there. If you're not sure whether you have wudu or not, the solution is, it's not the solution for you to just go make wudu. That's not the solution to your problem. Okay? The easiest solution is to just break wudu. Like, do something that breaks wudu so that you will know for sure what state you're in. You know, so for example, a person might, just put their hand down their pants real fast, touch their private part, and that will break their wudu. That will let them know for sure that they now have impurity on them. So now they can go make wudu and have an intention that's certain. Okay, your intentions can't be wishy-washy. You can't have a intention that's where you're not even sure what you're intending. That doesn't work. Your intention has to be clear, has to be certain. Okay, so you need to know. Let's go back to what's written here, number 5. You need to have knowledge that this act you're about to do is actually an obligation upon you. Okay, you need to know that you need to lift the purification. Otherwise, no purification will be lifted by your action. There are other solutions as well to this problem. If you're not sure if you have wudu or not, there are other solutions. But for now, I would recommend this one. It's easy to remember and easy to practice, easy to abide by. Just break wudu on purpose and then make wudu. Number 6. Number 6 of the conditions for wudu and ghusl, it says not to believe a defined obligation. What it means is not really defined, but specific. So it's a condition that you not believe any specific one of the obligations of your action are actually recommended. Okay, so wudu, for example, wudu, we talked in the last couple chapters about the 6 things that are obligatory in the wudu. And then we gave a list of, I don't know how many things, maybe 20 or so things. 25 things, because they're lettered from A to Y. We gave a list of 25 things that are recommended. And there were also other things mentioned in other parts of the book that weren't in that list of 25. So there are a number of parts of the wudu which are recommended. There are 6 parts which are obligatory. Okay, what we're saying here is, well, how do I say this? The ideal situation is that you will know that the 6 things which are obligatory are obligatory. If you know that much, then your wudu is valid for sure. But let's say there's someone who they have no idea which parts of the wudu are obligatory and which parts are recommended. Okay, in fact, let's just say for this example, let's say that the person thinks all of it is obligatory. They think in order for your wudu to be valid, you have to do all of those things. Okay, well then in this case, his wudu is valid because the 6 things that actually are obligatory, he believes them to be obligatory. He's wrong about all of those optional parts, but for the 6 that are obligatory, he recognizes them as obligatory, so therefore his wudu is valid. It counts. Let's take another example. Let's say there's someone who knows that some parts of the wudu are obligatory and some parts of them are optional, but he doesn't know. He doesn't know which ones are the obligatory parts and which ones are the optional parts. In this case, his wudu is valid. It counts. Why? Because he did not pick a particular one of the 6 things that are obligatory and believe in his heart that it's not obligatory. Okay, for him, everything stayed very vague. He wasn't specific about anything. He just knows that some parts of the wudu are obligatory, some parts are not, and he didn't have a particular belief about any one particular aspect. He just knows in very general terms, not everything is obligatory. This person, their wudu is valid. It counts. Who's the one whose wudu does not fulfill this condition? It would be the person who says in his heart, says that wiping the head is not necessary. Like he does it, he wipes the head maybe, but in his heart, he believes that wiping the head is not something that's an obligation. Okay. He believes that your wudu is valid even if you don't wipe any part of your head at all. That person, when he makes wudu, his wudu is not valid. Even if he does it in the proper way, even if he did wipe his head, his wudu is not valid because when he wiped his head, it wasn't his intention to fulfill an obligation by doing so. Okay, you're going to see as we go through this book, a lot of the aspects of our ritual practices in this deen, they go back to the intention. This is why some of the scholars, they said that the hadith, innamal a'malu bin niyat, the hadith in which our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the actions are according to their intentions. Some of the scholars, they said that hadith is half of fiqh. Like half of the knowledge of fiqh is that one hadith. And some scholars said a third, and some scholars said other things. But that hadith pertains to so many different chapters of fiqh. And you'll see as we go through this book how frequently intention is mentioned. And we need you to understand that when we say intention, we're talking about a clear intention. Okay? A clear intention that is certain. All right? We don't tolerate, and it's not valid to have uncertainty in your intentions. Number 7, purifying water. So one of the conditions of wudu and ghusl is that the water you're using to make your wudu or make your ghusl, that water is purifying water. And way back in the first chapter of the book, we talked about the difference between water that's pure and purifying versus water that's pure and purifying but dislike to use, versus water that's pure but not purifying versus water that's not even pure because it's contaminated. Okay, we talked about those distinctions. Well, your wudu and ghusl, in order for them to be valid, you have to be using water that's purifying. Okay, doesn't matter if it's disliked to use or if it's not disliked to use. As long as it's purifying, then this condition is met for your wudu or your ghusl to be valid. Number 8. Removal of a substance impurity. When he says substance impurity, what he's talking about is najas filth. Okay, I think it'd be a good idea if you just even maybe scratch out the word impurity and write najas there so that you know exactly what type of impurity he's referring to. But najas is of 2 types. Najas filth. Najas, it's coming up soon in the book, inshallah, is a list of things that are najas, but there are certain substances in the world that the Sharia declares to be najas. They're filthy, so we need to avoid contact with them, because if these substances are on our body or our clothing, or if we touch them at some point in the salat, it makes our salat invalid. So we want to avoid contact with najas filth. Okay, and najas is of 2 types. Najas can be a substance, meaning something that has mass, okay? Something tangible, it has mass, it's a solid, liquid, or gas. Najas can be like that, or najas can be what we call hukmiyya. It can just be a ruling where there's nothing actually there. It's just a ruling. Both of these are najas. Both of these are najas. Let me give you an example of each. Urine. Urine is a liquid. It has mass. It's tangible. Urine is an example of the first type. Something that's najas filth and it has mass. Okay? If a person got urine on their arm, they would see liquid. They'd see like a little puddle of liquid right there. And that is what he's referring to as a substance impurity. Najas that has mass. Okay, but if the person held his arm like that and didn't move his arm, and the wind was blowing or it was a hot day or something like that, after a while he would find that it just dried up. He would find that the urine went away. He would find after a while that now there is no mass of urine on his hand. All right, the liquid is gone. There's no solid there. There's no gas there. All right, the najasa is gone. The substance of it is gone, but the ruling of it remains. The Sharia ruling would still be that part of his hand that the urine touched is contaminated. And that ruling is going to stay until he washes it. When he washes it with water, then the ruling will change and say that his skin is purified. Okay, I want us to understand that najasa has these 2 types. It might be something with actual mass, or it might be something that has no mass, but the ruling of contamination is there, even though the mass of the najasa is gone. Najasa has these 2 types. Right here, he's only talking about the first type, the kind that has mass. Okay, he's saying that if you want to make wudu, or if you want to make ghusl, you have to first remove any najas filth that has mass to it. You have to remove that first. And then you can wash that spot to remove any ritual impurity from it, any hadath. The najas gets removed first, and the hadath gets removed second. This is if the najas is something that has mass to it. All right, this condition, it's not required for the second kind of najas. If the najas is just a ruling and it has no mass at all, then in that case, you can pour water over it and it will lift the ruling of hadath being there and also lift the ruling that the place is contaminated. So you can wash it one time and you'll accomplish both tasks. You'll lift the ritual impurity and you'll lift the contamination with one washing. But if the najis filth has mass, then you don't lift the impurity and the contamination with a single wash. Rather, you remove the contamination first by removing the mass, that's najis filth, and then after that, you can perform your wudu or your ghusl. Also in number 8, he says, and that there doesn't remain on the limb something which will change the water. So it's also important that you don't have on your body or in a place that the water is going to be flowing, that you don't have something there that will change the water such that it would stop being purifying. Okay, we mentioned in the first chapter that it's possible for water to mix with something and stop being purifying. So let's say someone wants to make wudu and they want to pour water on their arm, and someone puts like a little bit of Kool-Aid powder on their arm. So then when you start pushing water on your arm, the water mixes with the Kool-Aid powder and the water turns into Kool-Aid. Okay, in that case, everything after that point, you're now washing it with Kool-Aid. You're not washing it with water. Which means, therefore, that everything after the water turned to Kool-Aid, there's no ritual impurity being lifted. There's no hadath being lifted. Okay, so your wudu, you're not making wudu after that point. You're just spreading Kool-Aid on your body. Okay, so he's saying in order for your wudu to count, it's a condition that there not be anything on your body that will change the water into something other than water. Number 9, he says that one shouldn't suspend one's intention. Again, this is a case where the person translated the word very literally. The word ta'liq in Arabic, it does mean to suspend something or hang something, but it's also very frequently used to mean to make something a condition. And that meaning is what's really meant here. It's not like, hanging something. What he says in number 9, he's saying that one shouldn't make one's intention conditional upon something. Okay? And he says shouldn't, but really it should say mustn't, right? It will destroy your wudu and render it invalid if your intention was conditional upon something happening, because that means your intention was not absolutely clear and absolutely certain. For example, if someone says, if my husband comes home, then I will, if someone says, if my husband comes home, then I intend to lift impurity. So what that means is, if your husband doesn't come home, then you don't intend to lift impurity. So when you're doing the action, then you don't know whether you're intending to lift impurity or not. So you don't have that clarity. You don't have that certainty in your intention. That's why the wudu or the ghusl would not be valid in that case. You can't make your intention conditional upon if something happens. Number 10. It says the water should flow over the limb. And again, he said should, but it ought to be translated as must. The water must flow over whichever place needs to be washed. Okay, so in the wudu, that would be the face, the hands, and the feet. Those are the parts of the wudu that must be washed. So therefore, the water must flow over these places, meaning the water itself is moving. Okay, like the water, if you left it alone, it would move on its own down your skin or down your arm or whatever. The water is flowing. Okay, this is required for the wudu to actually lift the hadath or the ghusl to actually lift the hadath. This is required. Now, if there's a part that doesn't need to be washed, if there's a part that only needs to be wiped, well, then the water doesn't need to flow over those parts. So your head, your ears, in the wudu, your foot gear, if you're wiping on foot gear, and we'll get to that next week, inshallah. Things that only need to be wiped, the water doesn't have to flow on it. But things that need to be washed, what makes it washing is the fact that the water is flowing. So if the water didn't flow, that means you didn't wash. And in wudu, the face, the hands, and the feet must be washed. So the water must flow. In ghusl, your entire body must be washed. So the water has to flow. All right. If the water's not flowing, then you didn't perform wudu or ghusl. And lastly, number 11, it says the entrance of time and succession for the one in continual ritual impurity. Number 11 is a special case, but we talked several classes ago about the person who cannot keep a wudu, a person who is constantly breaking wudu, and they can't keep a wudu long enough to perform a salat. Okay, we're talking about the person with incontinence, for example, the person who drips. All right, a drop of urine will come out. Then 20 seconds later, a drop will come out, or 40 seconds later, a drop will come out. They can't keep a wudu long enough to make a salat. And some people, their incontinence, it's not urine, it's gas, for example. Every few seconds, they fart a little bit. Gas comes out. Or some of them might have incontinence of, some other substance, like, a woman might have a substance coming out from her private part every so often, such that she can't keep a wudu. These people, because they're in continual states of impurity, there's special rules for them. And we mentioned in that other class that among the rules are they have to wait for the time to come in, for the time for the salat to come in. And after the time of the salat has come in, they have to clean the area of whatever filth is coming out. They have to block up the place that the filth drips out of. They need to secure the blockage. They need to make a wudu, not with the intention of lifting hadath, but with the intention of making salat permissible for them. And then they must pray immediately without wasting time between any of those steps. These are the special rules that apply to the da'im al-hadath, the person who is persistently in a state of impurity. For that person, it's a condition for their wudu or ghusl to be valid that the time for the salat is already in. So if they're doing this purification for the purpose of praying dhuhr, they don't do the purification until dhuhr time is in. If they're doing it for the purpose of praying asr, they don't do it until asr time is in, because the entrance of the time is a condition for their wudu or ghusl to be valid. It's not a condition for other people. Okay, if you don't have these kinds of incontinence, then you can make your wudu early. You can make wudu in dhuhr time for a salat that you're going to pray in asr time. But the person who has continual impurity, they don't have that flexibility. They have to do their purification after the time comes in. It's also required for them to do succession. Okay, and if you recall, when we say succession, what we mean is you don't leave a gap, a long gap between one step and the next step. So once they begin washing the impurity from their body, they don't leave a long time gap before they block up the place that the impurity comes from. And they don't leave a gap between that and when they secure the block. And they don't leave a gap between that and when they make wudu. And when they're making wudu, they don't leave a gap between the parts of the wudu. And after they finish the wudu, they don't leave a gap before they make the salat. They do all of these things one right after the other without a long gap in between any step. This is what's required for them. If they fail to do that, then that means their wudu or ghusl would be invalid. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, we've now covered the conditions of wudu and ghusl. This chapter is extremely important, so please do study it well. I'll take questions now. If you have one, please ask. Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala to those who salamed me. Someone asks, if you wipe over the khimar, do you still have to wipe your ears? So if you recall, we said that wiping ears is not required at all. Wiping the ears is something that's optional. Okay. Similarly, wiping over the khimar is also optional. You don't have to do either of those things if you don't want to. Rather, what's required is that you wipe some part of your head. So you're going to have to take a wet finger and stick it under the khimar to wipe part of your head. And then you can take the finger out. If you've done that much, then you've done enough for your wudu to be valid. However, if you want to follow the sunnah, which is to wipe your entire head, you can, after sticking your finger under the khimar and wiping something, you can then wipe on top of the khimar as an optional matter, as a matter which is recommended and not required. You can wipe on top of your khimar. I did not hear anything about the ears under the khimar, but again, you don't have to wipe them. You don't have to do so. This thing about wiping over top of the garment is based on something the Prophet did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he was wearing a turban and he put his finger under the turban and wiped, and then he wiped on top of the turban. Okay, a turban ordinarily does not cover the ears. So, the Prophet alaihi salatu wasalam, it's not mentioned in the hadith whether he wiped over like there was some garment on his ears that he wiped over. It's not mentioned. Someone asked, if you can't keep wudu due to gas, do you have to block that area which gas comes from? Well, that depends on how much time comes in between the times when the gas comes out. Okay, if a person is breaking wind like all the time to the point where they cannot make a salat in the gaps between breaking wind, then this person, therefore, is one of these people who's continually breaking wudu, continually in a state of impurity. And according to the rules, yes, you would block up the place where the gas is coming from until you complete your salat. There's a request for dua in the channel, so definitely I recommend all of us to look through the quotes. If people are asking for special duas, definitely do so. In fact, let's make dua for everyone here, inshallah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Oh Allah, I ask that you cleanse the hearts of all of those who are in attendance of this lesson, Ya Allah. I ask that you forgive us our sins. I ask that you grant us guidance. I ask that you Make our affairs easy, Ya Allah. Expand our chest with our situations. Make our affairs easy, Ya Allah. I ask that you grant us satisfaction with what you've given us, and that you rid our hearts of greed and desire of that which we don't have. O Allah, rid our hearts of love of the dunya. O Allah, fill our hearts with love of ibadah. O Allah, I ask that you grant us health in our bodies and grant us wealth in our pockets. O Allah, I ask that you make us better Muslims. Help us to repent before we die. Help us, Ya Allah. Grant us that we be martyrs at the time that we die. O Allah, I ask for forgiveness after we die and pardon at the time of judgment. O Allah, and more than anything, I ask that you grant us to paradise. Ya Allah, I ask that you grant us to paradise. All the affairs of this life, no matter how hard they may seem to us now, once we enter the paradise, it'll all be worth it. And of course, there'll be no sadness on that day. Oh Allah, I ask that you grant us that. Grant us a never-ending time of happiness, a time of delight, a time of bliss, a place where there's going to be no sadness, no need for patience. MashaAllah. Oh Allah, whatever those here in attendance need, I ask that you grant them their needs. Oh Allah, I ask that you don't make our biggest trials in our religion, but rather put our trials in our dunya, Ya Allah. And I ask that the last thing we say before death be La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and help us to die as Muslims. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Barakallahu fikum. Our next class will be next week. I know next 1 week from today is the so-called Thanksgiving Day, but inshallah we will still have class at the normal time. I hope to see you there, but if you can't make it, these sessions are recorded. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Barakallahu fikum. I'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.